The Wall Street Journal confirmed it on Thursday, citing a Pentagon official. The White House has authorized the deployment of a Marine Expeditionary Unit to the Middle East, approximately 2,500 Marines, infantry, artillery, armored support, air assets, full logistics, not a training rotation, not a symbolic presence, an active operational deployment. Iran's military responded the same day with a statement that was 3 words long. Ground forces welcome. That is not bravado. That is a prepared position. Iranian military doctrine has been planning for exactly this scenario. U.S. ground forces entering a contested Gulf environment for years. Mines in the waterways, missile batteries in hardened positions, drone swarms pre-programmed for saturation attacks, hidden launchers designed to survive the kind of air campaign that has already been running for weeks. The Marines are deploying from a California desert base that specializes in extreme temperature operations and desert warfare. The training matches the terrain they are heading toward. The Pentagon made sure that detail was in the disclosure. But here is the question that the WSJ report, the Pentagon briefing, and Iran's 3-word response all leave unanswered. Are these Marines being sent into a region where the conditions required for their doctrine to work actually exist right now? By the end of this story, you'll understand why the most important word in the entire deployment announcement isn't Marines or Gulf. It's the word the Pentagon chose not to say out loud. A Marine Expeditionary Unit is a specific instrument with a specific purpose. It is built to be the first force into a contested environment, self-sufficient in fuel, ammunition, medical capacity, and command, capable of independent operations without external support. Its doctrine describes it as the door, the force that opens entry points, secures beachheads, holds territory under fire, and prepares the ground for larger follow-on forces that arrive after the initial position is established. When the Pentagon deploys an MEU, it is not sending a garrison, it is sending an opening move. That doctrinal reality is why the disclosure, confirmed to the Wall Street Journal by a Pentagon official, was not a leak. It was a controlled release aimed simultaneously at the American public as a signal of escalating commitment, at U.S. allies as pressure to align their own postures, and at Iran as a direct deterrence message about what comes next. Here is the foreshadowing the entire story depends on. MEU doctrine requires air superiority. The unit is designed to operate in contested environments, but not in environments where the air above it is actively owned by the adversary. The Marines' ability to do what they are trained to do depends on a condition that, according to reporting on the current state of the conflict, is disputed. That condition, air superiority, was not mentioned in the Pentagon's disclosure. It was the word they chose not to say. MEU doctrine, deploy where you control the air. Current Gulf status, airspace contested, bases damaged, radar systems degraded. Those 2 sentences are the entire problem. The central conflict in this deployment is the gap between what an MEU is designed to operate in and what the current Gulf environment actually looks like. Confirmed by reporting, 2 U.S. carrier strike groups, the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford, have been repositioned away from forward areas. The Pentagon has not officially described this as a withdrawal. The operational effect functions like one. Forward carrier presence is the primary mechanism through which the U.S. projects air power in the Gulf. Repositioning those groups changes the coverage map for everything that depends on carrier-based air assets, including Marine Expeditionary Units operating ashore. Satellite imagery cited by the New York Times allegedly shows damage at 17 military-related sites, with 11 confirmed U.S. installations reported hit across Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain. Damage has been reported near TPY-2 radar systems, the radar backbone of THAAD missile defense. Without functioning radar, missile interception fails. 4 American aircraft reportedly lost in Kuwait. A KC-135 Stratotanker downed over Iraq. These figures carry varying verification statuses, but the directional picture they collectively suggest is of a contested, not controlled air environment. Iran's military statement, Ground Forces Welcome is backed by a specific capability set: mines in Gulf waterways, missile batteries in hardened and dispersed positions, drone swarms, and hidden launchers specifically designed to survive sustained air campaigns. The welcome is not rhetorical. It is a prepared position. Here is the unexpected complication that the deployment announcement cannot paper over. Trump simultaneously called on China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom to send naval forces to the Strait of Hormuz. None responded positively. Gulf states refused offensive participation. China called for a ceasefire and declined to commit naval forces, describing itself as a neutral mediator. The diplomatic ask produced a diplomatic rejection across the board from allies and from the one major power whose cooperation would have most meaningfully changed the strategic picture. The Strait of Hormuz, meanwhile, remains selectively open, allowing passage for Chinese, Indian, and neutral country tankers while blocking or threatening U.S.-aligned traffic. This is not the blunt instrument of full closure. It is a precision economic tool, applying maximum pressure on U.S.-aligned energy consumers while preserving relationships with the nations Iran needs to stay diplomatically viable. The Marines are heading into that environment. There's a historical pattern to this kind of deployment that no one in the Pentagon briefing wanted in the headline. I need you to know what it is before the next part of this story lands. In 1965, the United States deployed Marines to Da Nang, Vietnam. The initial force was approximately 3,500 troops, described at the time as a limited defensive deployment to protect an air base. It was not framed as the beginning of a ground war. By 1968, there were over 500,000 U.S. troops in Vietnam. The straightforward read of the current Marine deployment is strength projection. Washington demonstrating resolve, signaling to Tehran that escalation has a ceiling, giving U.S. commanders ground options. In this framing, the MEU is a deterrence tool, but the same deployment that functions as deterrence also creates momentum. An MEU ashore in a contested Gulf environment requires protection. Protecting it requires air assets. Air assets require bases. Bases require defense. Defense requires more forces. Each step makes the next step easier to authorize and harder to reverse, not because anyone planned a ground war, but because the institutional logic of force protection generates its own escalation pressure independent of political intent. The strategic question the data raises is whether this deployment represents a planned escalation toward ground operations or a response to a situation that is not going as well as public statements suggest. The confirmed facts support both readings simultaneously. The WSJ report is real. The MEU capability is real. The doctrinal role as the door for larger forces is real. The diplomatic rejections from every ally Trump called are real. The repositioned carrier groups are real. Iran's ground forces welcome statement was issued with the specificity of a prepared response, not an improvised one. The mines, the missile batteries, the drone swarms, the hidden launchers, these were in position before the first Marine boarded a transport. The 1965 Da Nang deployment did not feel, at the time, like the beginning of the longest war in American history. The Marines currently at sea, approximately 2,500 of them, trained for desert warfare, heading toward a region with contested airspace, mined waterways, damaged bases, and degraded missile defense, are not making a decision. That decision has already been made for them in Washington and Tehran simultaneously, 2,500 Marines. No allied naval support, contested airspace. Iran already prepared. The door metaphor cuts both ways. It depends entirely on who's standing on the other side. The deployment is confirmed. The strategic context around it, the Allied rejections, the repositioned carriers, the damaged installations, the selective strait opening, the prepared Iranian response is the story the headline alone doesn't carry. One thread this story cannot close. The strategic question the data raises and doesn't answer. Planned escalation escalation or response to failure? Both lead to the same ships, the same Marines, the same destination. The answer determines everything about what happens after they arrive. Iran's response was 3 words: ground forces welcome. The welcome was prepared before the deployment was announced. That preparation took years. The Marines are still at sea. The welcome is still waiting. The deployment is confirmed. The Allied rejections are confirmed. The repositioned carriers are confirmed. Subscribe if you want coverage that connects all of it, because every piece of this conflict is connected to the others, and the connections are where the actual analysis lives. Leave a comment. Do you think the Marine deployment is a planned escalation toward ground operations, or a signal of desperation after an air campaign that hasn't achieved its objectives? And does the distinction matter if the outcome is the same? And the diplomatic rejections, every ally Trump called, none committed, tell a story about the international coalition supporting this operation that hasn't been fully reported yet. That story is next.